Hi, welcome back to Enjoying the Word. We're thinking about the Bible study process, and we've already done a set of videos where we've worked our way through the initial stage looking at John 12. Now we're going to kind of work our way through again, but focusing on the second stage of the process, and we're going to use a different passage, 1 Peter chapter 2, the first 10 verses. Okay, so here is the process. We want to look and see what's there. What does the text say? Then we can think about the learning stage, learning what does the text mean. And then once we've understood what it means, love and live, that is our response to the person revealing himself through it and to the instruction that is given there. So that's the process, okay? And what I want to do in this video is kind of bold. I want to do the look phase for 1 Peter chapter 2, 10 verses, kind of all together. So I'm going to blitz through it. Hopefully it won't feel too much like a blitz, but this should set us up to then really spend time in this little mini series focusing on how to make sense of a passage, the learning part. Okay, so here are the questions that we went through in the previous series, focusing on the look stage: who, when, where, what, which, and why. And so we're going to work our way through these questions using these verses. And the goal here isn't to make sense of it, it's just to notice what's there. And I would encourage you to go through it a little bit more slowly. We can't rush the observation stage and still do good Bible study. But also I don't want this video to last forever, so I'll keep it fairly brief. But I'd encourage you, look at these verses and notice what's there so that we can then think about making sense of it. So let's start with the who question. There at the top, who is being referred to or spoken about, written about in this passage? Okay, so let's just jump in and notice a couple of things. So as you come to him, there's a reference to him, which is Jesus. Interestingly, in the context, the Lord there, same person, him. How's he described? A living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. So there's some information about Jesus. He is the focus down here in verse 6, little quotation as well. So you've got Jesus, but you've also got you, the people that Peter is writing to. You yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So he's speaking or writing here about Jesus and about the people, the followers of Jesus that he's writing to. In verse 7 and 8, we've got this distinction between you who believe and those who do not believe. And everything that follows here is really about those who do not believe. We'll look at that again sometime. And then back to the you in verse 9, but you, and then he gives a whole load of descriptions about these people. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, now you have received mercy. Okay, so that's the who. Let's look at the when and the where in this passage. Okay, so sometimes there's reference to timing, specifically timing features. Sometimes there's tenses that come through. So for example, in verse 5, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up. That's a present sense, like that's happening now. That's what God is doing. We've got a location down here. Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone. Okay, so there's a quote from the Old Testament and a place reference within it. Let's jump forward. Let's go down to verse 10, just for one more example of a timing, a tense reference that's interesting here. Once you were not, that's past tense, but now you are, that's present tense. Something has shifted. We want to notice any time, any tenses, any place, any locations, any conceptual places within the passage. Okay, let's keep going. What about the what question? That takes us to details within the text, interesting terminology, repeated emphases, ideas, and so on. There's a lot here. We've got a little blitz at the start: malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, slander. And then we've got this concept of newborn infants and longing for. I need to figure out what that means. What does it mean to long for pure spiritual milk? Sorry, my pen is jumping all over here, but there's just so many details growing up into salvation. Living stone is repeated a couple of times. We've got the language of being built up as a spiritual house. We've got this idea of a holy priesthood and spiritual sacrifices and so on. So there's lots of detail within the passage. We've got the quote there, more quotes. We could kind of go through and notice that actually some of the language here and some of the language here is kind of tying back to the reference that, or the quotation that we had before. So we're just noticing several quotations here. And yeah, this kind of key terminology: chosen race, royal priesthood, holy nation, people for his own possession. Proclaim, that you may proclaim. There's an action, an outcome that's being described. There's this timing: once you were not, but now you are God's people. And then mercy and receiving mercy. So there's lots of specific details that we need to go through and make sense of. Okay, which other Bible passages are influencing this passage? Well, we've got some quotes. So for example, down in verse 6, we've got a quote from Isaiah 28, I think it's verse 16. But sometimes it's not obvious that there's another passage feeding in. But in terms of the whole book of 1 Peter, we've got a hint up here: tasted that the Lord is good. That's Psalm 34 language. And Psalm 34 is kind of in the background for the whole of this epistle. Okay, and we've got this specific quote, Isaiah 28. We've got a quote here, that's Psalm 118, verse 22. And then we've got another one down here. What is that? That's Isaiah. I think Isaiah 8, verse 14. Is that right? I'm not sure. I'll double check that. Hopefully that's true. And come down to this last bit here, this last verse, verse 10. That's got language from Hosea. It's not marked as a quotation, but it's Hosea 2:23. Not a people, now a people, not receive mercy, have received mercy. So sometimes the other passages are quoted and obvious, sometimes they're feeding in. Okay, and then the last question, the why question: why did the writer write it in this form? We're not dealing with a narrative, we're not dealing with poetry, although there's quotations that are in the form of poetry, but really we're dealing with discourse, a letter. He's writing to them for them to read it, to hear it, and to respond to it. So being aware of that, just noticing that, will help us as we move on to learn what this passage is talking about. So there's a blitz. Okay, hopefully you've seen, okay, there's lots in there. Take some time, look at it more closely, and then in the next videos we'll work our way through what does it mean to learn what the text means, what's involved in that. See you soon.